Hey everybody, it's Tracy. And in just stumbling upon different projects and inquiries and stuff like that, I found that there's this great tendency for new projects to set up as DAOs, but do it outside of the United States. And as far as I'm aware, the Wyoming LLC is the only formal corporate body that encompasses DAO-like principles, right? Like you won't find it anywhere else. So what people are doing is basically like reimagining mostly offshore Caribbean and otherwise structures, and then sort of coming up with the context of it's an algorithmically managed entity. And that makes some sense because the DAO is an untested legal structure, as I mentioned before, and the regulatory framework for all crypto, irrespective of like how you're organized from a corporate perspective in the United States, is very unclear, right? So you're in this gray area. And so makes sense. And then geographically, a project emanating from Singapore just may not want exposure to the US. So it makes sense, right? So I don't begrudge people from doing it, but you have to be careful. And like the same arguments hold true for the actual Wyoming DAO, is that just because you call it a DAO doesn't mean it's decentralized. And when you get into a structure that isn't specifically allotted or designed for a DAO-like entity, then you have to be really creative. Because like in the BVI, for instance, where a lot of just normal private limited companies are being like reconfigured as DAOs or started as DAOs, the memorandum and articles of association, the governing documents of that entity, don't necessarily like allow you to say with specificity, we're managed algorithmically by smart contract, and we go from there. And that's not enough even in the United States, right? Because you can still be centralized and say, well, no, we're managed by smart contract, and then it's a core central management with the profit motive, and you fall under Howey, and then you trigger securities laws when you sell the tokens and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of this cautionary tale, because what you really have to do is not only memorialize the fact that you're managed by smart contract, which you may not be allowed to really do in the governing documents. You have to memorialize that by actions of the initial shareholders, members, whatever the entity is, wherever you are, right? Like there has to be some documentation, because if any regulator came to you and said, you're a DAO, but clearly you're centralized, at least you can point to the fact and say, no, on this date we took this corporate action and we are a DAO. But like the corporate registry in BVI isn't going to be like the corporate or the Secretary of State in Wyoming and say, oh yeah, just give us your smart contract address and everything's cool. They're going to reject it, right? They won't allow you to incorporate. So you're going to incorporate with fairly basic, language in your memorandum and articles of association, but have to take subsequent action. Because if you don't have that memorialization, and this includes like things as stupid and silly as like using a notary, right? So you have proof of it. If anybody ever knocked on your door, you wouldn't have that plausible deniability. And at the same time, even if you do that, right, and I've talked about this multiple times, if you don't act or operate in a decentralized fashion, whatever you put in writing, wherever you put it, doesn't mean a thing, right? Because there's so many DAOs in Wyoming that are set up, and there's like a smart contract or token address in the articles. Like you can go look, just type in DAO, search it. You'll see them, and most of them they're not even smart contracts. They're just like the token address. But in Wyoming, they don't check, right? So you have to like legitimately have the smart contract, and the company operates according to that smart contract. Else you're just wasting your time and money. Like there's just no point. And, a second point is you can start a DAO, and almost naturally, most DAOs are going to be centralized at inception because they're sort of the idea, if you will, of a few promoters, right? And then you distribute tokens, sell tokens, and it kind of like goes from there. And you get to this point where you have like ownership, but now no one's a controlling owner, right? Now it's like looking less centralized because there's not core ownership. There's, less than 50% across the board, and like people have a say, and voting, and you can all that. Like, so most DAOs will start just by virtue of how any project, whether it would be in crypto or not, starts with the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4 people, right? So it's you always are going to transition, right? It's just that transition and making that transition from centralized to decentralized has to be memorialized at inception, and then as you progress, right? Like as you distribute tokens and there's less and less core ownership and control of just a select group of people or one person. So, inherently not a bad thing, right? Offshore DAOs. I think there's obvious benefits just incorporating offshore for any reason, right? Whether it's a DAO or not, that, are better than like the US, UK, traditional places where you can incorporate taxes, asset protection, etc. But it takes an art to really structure those DAOs, whether it's Caribbean or elsewhere, properly. And memorialization, starting with the smart contract, ending with the rights and privileges associated with the token, is absolutely paramount. Absolutely 100% paramount. And it just takes creativity and nothing sort of like formal that goes with a corporate register. It could be filed like you'd see in the States, because they just don't do it that way. So that's my take. I think like anything in crypto, it's all, gray area and sometimes looks like a crapshoot, but you do your best, right? So if you have questions, definitely hit me up, Adam at AdamTracy, TRACY.io, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.